On today's Locked On Giants podcast, we're going to take a look at some obscure stats, some figures, and some numbers that need to change in 2024. That's coming your way next here on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Chen, a credentialed member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI. You can find the written work over at si.com/NFL/Giants. And as always, a big welcome on in to my Blue Crew community members, to my everydayers, my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And on today's show, I was in a numbers mood. I don't know why. I guess maybe because I was doing some salary cap stuff and some statistics and whatnot. But I said to myself, how about we do a show on some numbers from last season, some numbers that maybe will change this year or need to change and whatnot. So we're going to devote the first part of the show to some of these numbers that I dug up from various sources. Then in segment 2, with Darren Waller expected to retire, how will the Giants replace him? I know that's a loaded question, but it's a legitimate question, and we're going to go over why it's legitimate and the surprising way I think they're going to replace Darren Waller's snaps in this offense. And then finally, we will wrap things up with my pick of key second-year players, one on offense, one on defense, that really need to step up this year and who I think will step up this year and have a big year for the New York Giants as they look to get things back on track. So that is our agenda for today. Again, welcome on in. Let's kick things off with a look at the numbers. Now, I went to various sources for these numbers. These are all stats that I kind of picked up when I was doing some writing over for New York Giants on SI. I want to start off with offensive personnel on first down. Now, I got to thinking, okay, last year, obviously the Giants didn't have a number one receiver. The closest they had was Darius Slayton. They had Saquon Barkley. So I wanted to see what the Giants did on first down in terms of 11 personnel, which is one running back, one tight end, and 12 personnel, which is one running back and two tight ends. And I wanted to see if perhaps you might be able to anticipate if the numbers are going to change. So what I found was the Giants ran 11 personnel 58% of the time last year on first down. They did 12 personnel 23%, which was a high number compared to the rest of the league. And that obviously, with the offensive line having the struggles that they had, the Giants going with the two tight end set, looking to maybe, get a little more oomph, if you will, into the blocking. This year, I think with the addition of Malik Neighbors, you're going to see that 11 personnel percentage on first down. You're going to see that go up, right? I would not be surprised if that number starts to push upwards of the high 60s. Neighbors is going to be a big target for this team. I think we can all agree on that. And, the use of three wides is going to be really big on this team. Now, I say that because I believe Brian Dable is going to take over the play calling. I've said that before. It was said on yesterday's program. If you happen to catch yesterday's interview with Gary Myers, I think that's the direction it's going in. And Brian Dable, historically, when he was with Buffalo as their offensive coordinator, very heavy usage of 11 personnel, especially on first down. So first down, a very critical down. I don't have to tell you that. That's where, you want to pick up ideally at least 40% of the required yardage you need so that you give yourself options on second and third downs. You don't get into these second and long, third and long situations. So I do think the Giants are going to increase their usage of 11 personnel on first down by at least I'm going to say between 7 and 10% from this past year. Now, I also took a look at the target distribution in the passing game, and this was kind of interesting. Wide receivers were targeted 57% of the time, tight ends 22%, and running backs 20%. I suspect, even though again, you have Malik Neighbors that's going to get a good chunk of the targets. I think you're going to see a slight rise in the number of targets the wide receivers get, and this is, by the way, is on all four downs. This isn't just these numbers aren't just on first down like the previous set were. Tight ends, I have a feeling that number is going to drop a little bit. Um, I'm going to talk about Darren Waller and how they're going to potentially replace him in the next segment, but I suspect the tight end targets are going to drop. I could see them going down maybe to about, I don't know, 17, 18%. The receivers and the running backs, or actually the running backs, I could see that going from 20%. Maybe that drops a little bit as well. And the receivers pick up in terms of the percentage in which they are targeted. With the running game, Devin Singletary, Tyrone Tracy Jr., they can catch out of the backfield. Eric Gray, I think, can do it too. But you don't have that Saquon Barkley type of talent out of the backfield. So I could conceivably see the running backs getting fewer targets in the pass distribution. And the receivers, look, if this offense aspires to be explosive, if it aspires to be more of a passing offense, where the tilt is more in favor of the pass as opposed to the run, you're going to see that wide receiver target distribution jump to at least, I would say, the mid 60s. So that's just just an educated guess on my part. Obviously, it's going to depend also on whether or not the Giants need to pass because they're behind, or do they need to run more? That can affect the numbers as well. Obviously, last year the Giants were behind a lot, so they passed a lot more than they ran the ball, and some of the numbers might have gotten a little skewed and bumped up. But yeah, I think the receivers are definitely gonna rule supreme. They did last year, but I think you're going to see a bigger difference between their targets and that of the tight ends and the running backs. All right, now this next stat I thought was really, really interesting. The offensive line, as we know, last year was not very good. And there was a study done using the data from Pro Football Focus. And, apologies to the gentleman who did the study, but I did not have his name handy. But I have it in an article on Giants on SI.com. Last year, of the quarterback pressures allowed by the Giants offensive line, 67% or 179 of those pressures were given up from the interior offensive line, which would be the two guards and the center. So, you think that might be a surprise because you would say to yourself, well, Evan Neal didn't have a good year when he was in there. They had a revolving door at left tackle once Andrew Thomas got injured. No, the problem was up the gut. That's where a lot of the pressures were coming. And that's kind of scary if you think about it. 67% of all the pressures allowed by the offensive line were allowed by 60% of the offensive line. Three guys, so, that being said, the hope is that this year, the interior of the offensive line is better. John Michael Schmitz will be back. It could not have been easy for him last year as a rookie to have a different guard on him on either side, really every other week it seemed. So hopefully they can solidify that. Jermaine Illuminor is going to be on one side of him, probably on the right side, I would think. I'm sorry, on the left side. I think Illuminor will be on the left side, John Runyon on the right side. And I know a lot of people were saying, well, John Runyon said he prefers the left side. Folks, as I think I've said before on the program, it makes sense to put John Runyon on the right side because he can help to settle down Evan Neal, who needs to be good this year. He needs to be, serviceable, which he has not been. And Jermaine Illuminor, played tackle, I think, last year for the Raiders. So I think thinking there is, you put him next to Andrew Thomas and the two of them pair up, and then Thomas can help Illuminor, and then you put Runyon next to Evan Neal, and he can help him. So that interior of the offensive line definitely going to be something to keep an eye on as we move forward into the summer, when we pick up again in the summer and the pads go on. This is an interesting stat I found. So I'll give you one more before we go to break. New York Giants offense last year versus a 4-man rush. Now, here's the thing. You would figure that if you got 5 offensive linemen and 4 guys are coming at you on the pass rush, 5 should be able to block 4 with no problem. The Giants faced a 4-man rush 62.94% of the time. And the success rate in blocking them, 38.32, which was 29th last year in the league. Now, I don't know how, when you have 5 versus 4, you have that bad of a success rate, but just underscores the trouble that the offensive line had. It also underscores why I think the Giants had to maybe keep the tight ends in a little bit more often to help block, or have the running backs chip guys. So that's obviously something that's got to change moving forward. I mean, some of these stats that I just read off to you are just, you sit there and you go, wow, was it really that bad? And, the proof was in the pudding. 6-11, the offense was ranked in the bottom third of the league. Nowhere to go up but up for this offense. And look, I think that Brian Dable taking over the play calling, and no, it's not official. He hasn't announced it, but that's the direction it's going in. It's like yesterday, like it was said yesterday on the show with Gary Myers. He said, look, the Giants hired Brian Dable in part for his creativity and his work with quarterbacks and his creativity in play calling and play design. So look, there's no reason to think that Dable won't take over that aspect. That's how it's trending. Will that help moving forward? We'll have to see. But, the onus is going to be on Dable if he does take it on, because if that offense, again, ranks at the bottom of the league, then we got a real problem on our hands. All right, coming up next, tight end Darren Waller is leaning towards retirement. That's nothing new. But how would they replace Darren Waller in the offense? And some of you are going to say, well, he wasn't, he's easily replaceable anyway. But I've got some numbers for you, and I've got some ideas that's coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Not into the NBA or NHL? Then check out the odds for other leagues like MLB, WNBA, PGA, and more. No matter what you're into, you'll find something that matches your interests. And you'll want to be part of all the action, because right now, when you sign up for an account with FanDuel, you will get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And again, thank you for spending part of your day with us. Coming up this week on the Locked On Giants podcast, I'm going to have Emery Hunt on the show with me tomorrow. Emery has been at the OTAs like I have. And as I always tell you, you can see a lot at the OTAs, but it's impossible to watch everything all the time. So we'll kind of cross-reference each other. Like, I'm sure Emery will have some different observations that I've been sharing, and vice versa. So we'll talk about that as we get ready for the Giants. I think it's OTA number 9, I want to say, is coming up Thursday. That will be open to the media. I, of course, will be there, and I will have for you a full report after that is done. That'll be my Friday show. So that is coming up here on the Locked On Giants podcast. All right, in this segment, Darren Waller. All right, look, it's been trending this way all off season. This really isn't news, but yet it was put out by ESPN that Darren Waller is leaning towards retirement, given that Waller has been away, that he's been focusing on his music career and whatnot. But if Darren Waller does indeed retire, how did the Giants replace him? Now I can just see the comments now. You're going to say, "What do you mean replace him? He was invisible. He was a waste, yada yada yada." Folks, last year Darren Waller, despite missing 5 games, was 3rd on the Giants in pass targets with 72. He ranked 9th amongst tight ends in targets. All right? So, you figure moving forward, again, Malik Neighbors will probably take a good chunk of those targets, but not all of them. By Draft Shark's estimation, there's going to be roughly 20% of Waller's targets that need to be distributed somehow. So you think to yourself, okay, probably going to go to the tight ends that are on the roster. And the top 2 tight ends projected, if Waller does retire, would be Daniel Bellinger, who is entering his 3rd year, and rookie Theo Johnson. Now, logic would say that Bellinger is going to be tight end 1, and he will probably get the bulk of that 20% to pass targets that are left over. I'm here to tell you that I'm not convinced that's how it's going to be. I think you will see Theo Johnson get the bulk of those pass targets. And here's why I say that. Now, I am aware that Theo Johnson's production at Penn State, how we would say meh, okay, wasn't very good. But I do not believe that that was all a matter of Theo Johnson not being able to do it. I think that was just how Penn State ran its offense. It went run heavy in some games. They had a bunch of other receivers, and they kind of distributed the ball around to where maybe Theo wasn't a central part of the passing offense. So it doesn't mean that he can't do it. Theo Johnson is a converted wide receiver. His college production, like I said, not eye-popping, but not bad. The kid has a better relative athletic score than Bellinger did coming out of college. Theo Johnson rated 9.99 out of 10. Bellinger 9.66 out of 10. You look at the breakdown of the relative athletic score, and basically, folks, Theo Johnson is head and shoulders above Daniel Bellinger. All right. You look at, what I'll do is I'll put the link in the show notes for you if you want to check it out. But anything that's in green on the relative athletic score, they break it down according to hand, arm, height, weight, bench press, 40-yard dash, 20-yard split, 10-yard split, vertical, broad jump shuttle, and 3-cone. There were only 2 areas really where Theo Johnson was in the yellow area, which is kind of like the middle of the pack type deal. So, and that was bench press, where he benched 19 and Bellinger benched 22. And then the 3-cone shuttle, where Theo had a 6.93 score versus Bellinger's 8.37. But in the shuttle, Theo Johnson was head and shoulders above Bellinger. He had a 9.31 versus Bellinger's 4.62. So, Bellinger's a good player. I don't want you to think that, I think that he's a one-trick pony. He's a good player, but he's not as athletic as, say, a Waller or a Theo Johnson. So my guess is that Theo Johnson will probably see just as many, if not more, pass targets than Bellinger will. Bellinger is kind of like, I guess a two-way type of guy where they want him to block. They want him to maybe occasionally go out for a pass. But I think Theo Johnson is the guy to keep an eye on. Look at the stats. Bellinger, 77 receptions, 938 yards, an average of 12.2 yards per reception, 12 career touchdowns. Theo Johnson, 68 catches, 771 yards, an average of 11.3 yards per catch, 5 touchdowns. Right? So pretty compatible almost. Bellinger, like I said, he's not as athletic as a healthy Darren Waller, not a big yards after the catch guy. I think Theo Johnson is a little bit, more of a yards after the catch guy. So I just think if, indeed Waller retires, which is again how it is trending, don't discount Theo Johnson being a bigger part of the passing offense, as opposed to, everything falling on Bellinger as far as, the tight end distribution goes. So we'll see how it plays out. Obviously, I still say the wide receivers are going to, rule the passing game, which would certainly make sense. But you got to mix it up. You have to get some passes into the tight ends. You got to get some passes into the running backs. I think Tyrone Tracy Jr. is probably going to get his share of passes. He's going to be a big guy out of the backfield, given his roots as a wide receiver. So I'm curious to see how they actually do it. And again, with Brian Dable likely to take over the play calling, that's something that we'll probably want to track as we get into the season, sort of how the tendencies differ moving forward this year as opposed to, the last couple of years when Mike Kafka was calling the plays. All right, coming up next, there are a couple of second-year players that I think, if they really take a step forward in their development, are going to be key to the Giants turning things around. Who are they? We'll talk about it right after this. Hey, Giant fans. Have you checked out Locked On Sports Today, the first ever national 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube? Locked On Sports Today is here for you all day, every day, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And in this segment, second-year players. We always talk about how important it is for the rookie class to come in and make an impact, but it's probably just as important for the second-year players to come in and show that they have taken a big step from year one to year two. And by the way, it's not just limited to the second-year players, but for the sake of this segment, we're going to limit it to the second-year players. And there's two guys in particular that I think, if they really take that quantum leap from year one to year two, this Giant team is going to be so much better. And I'm going to start off with the defensive side of the ball. Cornerback Deonte Banks. Now, Banks last year was pretty good. All right. He was day one starter and he was pretty good. Now, he did hit a little bit of a wall when, guys started running certain routes against him. Banks was a solid physical tackler, but the way he went about tackling towards the end of the season, kind of left him with the shoulder injury. So maybe needs to, dial that back just a smidge. I don't know, maybe just a little bit so that he better protects himself. And Banks, with his measurables and whatnot, he's a legitimate cornerback one. All right. Maybe he didn't quite reach that last year, but that's the direction he is trending. So that being said, Banks can be so much more productive this year. And here's why. With the change in philosophy on defense, Shane Bowen saying, look, we're going to get after the quarterback using our front seven. Now you take some of the onus off of the back end of the defense, and in particular Banks, who can now use his exceptional athleticism to get into positions, to knock away more passes, maybe pick up a few interceptions along the way, make game-changing plays. I mean, I don't have to tell you that last year, game-changing plays lacked in the defensive secondary. There just weren't a whole lot of them. And I think the change in philosophy will help that unit tremendously. So, Banks is definitely a guy that I think is going to take a huge step forward in his second season. Again, the key with him is he's got to be a little smarter with how he tackles, because he plays so much of a physical game that if you're not careful, you're not going to be available for the full slate. And they really need him for the full slate. So I don't think you'll see Banks this year hitting the quote unquote wall again. Last year was the rookie wall. And I just think the game's going to slow down for him. And I think he's going to be that much better in this defense, especially key given the youth that you're going to have back there. Cordell Flott on the other side is the projected other cornerback. You're going to probably have either Dane Belton or Tyler Newman starting alongside of Jason Pinnock. This is going to be Deonte Banks' defense as far as the defensive backfield is concerned. So they really need him to take a big step forward in this, his second season. All right, on the offensive side of the ball, a guy who was kind of forgotten because of the excitement of Malik Neighbors is receiver Jalen Hyatt. Now, last year, Jalen Hyatt was impressing everybody with his speed, his ability to separate, get open. He was burning, defensive backs left and right. And everybody thought, oh, wow, what an addition this is going to be to the Giants offense. And then we got to the season. And what happened? Didn't really see Hyatt a whole lot. And a lot of people were like, why? Well, here's why, folks. Just my guess. In college, Jalen Hyatt did not play the type of offense that he was required to play with the Giants. And by that, I mean, he didn't really, line up as much on the outside as he did, I believe, with the Giants in the few opportunities he got. He had his struggles against press coverage. And it was interesting because at last week's OTA, Steve Smith, the former Carolina Panther receiver, was working with Hyatt and Malik Neighbors on how to beat press coverage. He was showing them things with, they could do with their hand, to beat the jam and all that stuff. So you can bet that it was a point of emphasis for Jalen Hyatt moving forward. Because of the presence of Malik Neighbors, Jalen Hyatt is going to probably see a lot of single coverage, and he needs to win those single coverage matchups. All right. He's got the speed to take the top off of a defense. We all saw it. We saw it in the preseason, but he's got to be able to beat the jam, because right now, if you're a defensive coordinator and you're game planning against Jalen Hyatt, you say to yourself, okay, show me you can beat the jam. Show me that you can, keep your timing. And that's one of the biggest steps that Jalen Hyatt needs to take in his game. Now he's stronger. He looks like he's put a little, muscle on the upper body. How that translates over to the field, that we need to see. But right now, it's hard to tell because obviously there's no contact allowed in the OTA practices or the upcoming mini camp. But that's something certainly we want to see, is how does he do against press coverage, which was a problem for him last year. Because not his fault, it's just not something that he did a whole lot of in college. So we'll see how that all shakes out. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Giants podcast. Again, thank you for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast, and I will see you again tomorrow.